I'm Joshua Crumbaugh. It's a pleasure to be with you today at CarolinaCon, albeit remotely because at this current moment I'm on a flight headed to RSA. That being said, I recorded this the day before so that I could share this experience, this talk, this knowledge with you today. So I like to start every single one of my talks with a story. I don't know what's going on with my slides here. So I like to start every single talk with a story. And so this one is how I was able to talk my way into a Fortune 500 data center. Most social engineering and stories I'm going to tell, they're always about, or typically rather, about these instances where I had a ton of intelligence and I was able to use that intelligence to sort of manipulate a situation or pretext somebody into letting me do something. Now, in this particular case, I couldn't get anything. So after days and days and days, I am at still zero. I have no intelligence or very, very little. And I don't know who or what's going to be on the other side of the door. And the best thing I can do is just go knock on it and come up with a decent pretext or a pretext anyway. My go-to has always been latency, which for whatever reason, latency and talking about milliseconds has always worked well for me. For other people, it's carrying in a ladder. That's highly effective as well. But in this case, I just put on a nice suit, walked in, and anticipated that they would have a very specific type of person on the other side of that door. Now, most companies do. I'm going to describe the person, and I imagine you'll think of somebody at the place you work at that reminds you of that. So this is the person that remembers all of your children's names and your spouse's names and birthdays and ages and who's graduating when and all of these important details about your life. And this person does that for everyone at the company and is universally loved. Now imagine what happens when somebody like me goes and convinces that person, or rather fools that person into trusting me. See, when she begins trusting me and she will tell you my story, you're less likely to question my credentials. And I say she because it's more often than not a female, but it's not exclusively, something or a trait that I have the story of a character I call Betty that I'll tell you about later. But just imagine an older lady named Betty for now, and it'll play into a story I'll tell you a little bit later. But I get in there and I ask Betty I tell Betty about the latency issues we're having between corporate and the data center, and that I need to get in there and troubleshoot what's going on. She immediately says, well, that's not me, but that would be our IT director. Let me take you to him. See, the thing about people like her is that their job is often to facilitate and help get things done and help get people in touch with the right people. So if you convincingly sell them or pretext them on a problem, then you ultimately end up getting them to trust you. And when they trust you, everyone else trusts you because they are universally trusted. So anyway, that worked. And so she goes to the IT director and she says, hey, he is here to fix some movement. I don't think she actually said latency, but she did her best to sort of communicate it. And so at that point, now he says, not a problem. Here is your ID and the data center's over there. He just points me in the direction, and I go hang out there for about another 3-4 hours until lunch. And I head out and call and, sort of say, hey, we have this finding. So that was how I was able to talk my way into a Fortune 500 data center. So today I'm going to be sharing some red team tactics to both help red teamers as well as blue teams and just anyone interested in this sort of attack vector at all to better understand it. Now, I'm sharing this because I think it's important for people to hear just how quickly things can go very, very wrong, and especially when social engineering tactics are used. And so that's the reason that I'm sharing this. And so I hope you find this very helpful. Now, a quick fault notice. All too often, we blame the victim. We make comments like, you can't patch stupid, and that's an ID10T error, or PEBCAC and picnic, and a million other phrases and acronyms that we've created to victim shame. So what we need to do is get better at supporting and making people aware of the threat, than just shaming and disciplining the people that do fall victim to this. Now, interestingly enough, and it's still not this person's fault, because I feel like upper management should have provided training on this threat. But interestingly enough, I accidentally got my trusted agent on the phone, and I didn't realize it was my trusted agent. Now, for those of you who don't know what a trusted agent is, that's the 1 or 2 or 3 people in an organization that know everything that's going on with an assessment. And they're told things like, we are going to be calling and seeing if you'll do something that you shouldn't do at exactly this time. Or not maybe exactly this time, but on this exact day. And then we're going to be showing up and testing your on-site physical security at exactly this time or on exactly this day. And then we're going to come here in person and all that. So the trusted agent knew that somebody was going to be calling up trying to get them to do stuff that they shouldn't. And the trusted agent should not have fallen for those attacks given that scenario. So that is a humorous aspect of this. But it only goes to show the power of social engineering. And when you understand how the brain works, what all can be done. So I've made my career in ethical hacking, everything from, running application security or at teams around the globe. I worked for the SEC, the FDIC. I have worked for some major casinos. I've also worked for major corporations throughout my career. That all showed me that there's this massive human problem, and that we have to get better at solving it. So I founded Fish Firewall to create an AI that customizes training to the individual. And so think ChatGPT, but for security awareness. I'm one of the world's foremost experts on security awareness training and phishing attacks. I actually helped to write this college curriculum that you see on the right-hand side of the slides here today. And I'm well known for some of the feats that I've accomplished throughout my career, like talking my way into a bank vault, mostly that one, which you're hearing today. So the pretext, as I look up this bank that we've been tasked to do a penetration test with, and I imagine a couple of people in the audience might have been on that pen test with me. So shout out, guys, you know who you are. So anyway, as we are investigating this bank, we, of course, are looking at their mail exchange records to see all kinds of different data, but we want to see who's hosting their email. In this particular instance, we find that it's this obscure ISP, and we also find complaints online about that. So I come up with the idea that I should call as quality assurance. And just the pretext is that I'm quality assurance. We've been losing customers. I am calling proactively to get in, to fix their server and get them better service right now so that we don't lose their business because they're a very valued customer. All I need them to do is run this executable, which will update their email settings, and yeah. So that's the pretext here. This is many hours of calls. I couldn't fit all of it in here. So this is just some. Real quickly, my initial goal was just to get them to run malware, but I have learned throughout my career that I need to be opportunistic. So you set obtainable goals, but anytime opportunity strikes, you grab it. So with that, we're going to jump in. So how does all of this start? Well, it starts by typically crafting an us against the world scenario. Now, albeit phishing attacks predominantly exploit what are called cognitive biases, such as an ego bias, where I can play to your ego and get you to click on something. An example might be, hey, your talk's been accepted to Black Hat. So there's many of these, though. It's not just that. There's an authority bias and there's a confirmation bias. So I could just confirming that your values will get you to click on things that maybe you shouldn't. So there's all of these different biases, but if I'm going to call you up on the phone and try and manipulate you, it's going to be an us against the world thing. If I'm going to do this in person, it's going to be an us against the world scenario. So that's how it happens, and that's how it starts. And so I'm going to start by playing this, but the first thing I want to mention is that I have learned that when manipulating users into running your malware, the more difficult you make it on them to run your malware, the more likely you are to have them run your malware. So mistakes can actually be very helpful. They make you more human. They make it seem less fraudulent. And on top of that, they have time invested. See, when they've invested time into anything, they have an investment. And it's as simple as that. The psychology says once you have an investment into something, you're more likely to continue investing because you want the final outcome. So all it takes is the first step. Truly, once in social engineering, that's often the case. Once they take the first step, they will take every other step because they have bought into your pretext, which means they're going to do whatever it takes to get to that end goal. Here's the first clip. That way we can test it.
Everybody's.
No, just on yours.
Okay.
Or at least for now. There shouldn't be any issues with the other ones. So, right now I'm just trying to troubleshoot and make sure that yours is set up correctly. It's that same IP address. I just threw the file out there. But I can give it to you again if you need.
Bear with me 1 second.
But I got to give you the name of the file that will go at the end of the IP address.
Oh, okay. You got a pen that works this time since I can find the damn thing. All right, go ahead.
All right. It is
Okay.
//
Okay.
all lowercase email _ config.exe. So that's / email _ config.exe.
It says the web page cannot be found.
So at this point now, you'd think that by making it more difficult, he's less likely to go type in another URL. But like I said, I found that that's the exact opposite of the truth. So recon is everything. And the reason that recon is everything is because you can never underestimate human blindness when it comes to personal selfish desire. Now, what do I mean by this? Because it's not the here I'm offering you a Ferrari or something like that. No, it's truly more subtle, simple things that drive people at their core. And so an example is if you are the vice president of IT, and you've got a lousy vendor that's causing you all kinds of problems in one area, and every day you're getting phone calls and emails from your coworkers complaining about this area, then that can easily be exploited by somebody, because when I offer to fix that problem for you, you now are immediately blinded to the security risks because this has been a thorn in your side. That is one of the most effective things you can ever find. Now, I will mention when I call, I spoof the phone number. Don't trust caller ID. He did. His phone told him I was calling from his ISP. For blue teams, it's important to find a way to help your teams to identify your vendors and to validate your vendors. Give them a process, give them a methodology, give them a tool, but certainly give them resources to help them identify the vendors. So this is one of my favorite parts. This is really early on. This is, one of the first few steps in the entire process. We just got them to run or to try and type in the URL. And I put in a bad URL. And so now at this point, hear it for yourself.
It says the web page cannot be found. All right, let me try it again.
email_config.exe. Let me double check let me check the server. Oh, I was wrong. It's capital E on email and capital C on config.
Okay. That'll make a difference. Go ahead.
It definitely does. It's a tiny little program. It shouldn't take but a second to download.
Okay. Since it's on our antivirus software's kicking in, since it says it's an unknown publisher.
So it says it's an unknown publisher. So at this point, you'd think it's game over, antivirus kicked in. But the thing is, it's very predictable that if I'm asking you to run malware, that your antivirus might trigger, your SDR might trigger, your XDR might trigger, EDR, XDR might trigger. So that's very predictable that this might happen. And so I can have a pre-canned response ready to go and waiting for me. So red teams plan out these common things. It's called communications modeling, and it can help you avoid getting caught. Now, if you do get caught, we'll talk about that in just a second. So even with good planning, though, it can still be challenging. But honestly, this is one of my favorite parts right here.
Antivirus software's kicking in, since it says it's an unknown publisher.
Oh, it is an unknown publisher. My boss just put together the file, and the way those things work is with signed DLLs. Does it give you an option to ignore it?
No, give me just a second. I'm going to try this again. If I can grab that.
What antivirus software do you have? I might be able to find some stuff.
It's run through. So, downloads. Yeah, the only action it gives me is delete.
Oh, okay.
Don't run this program and delete. That's the only two actions it gives me.
All right. So, most time when I'm there in person, I would say, okay, how many people think it should be game over? And a few people would raise their hand. But the reality is we all know it's not game over here. I wouldn't be sharing the audio, but it should have been game over. Now, this brings me to the next rule, which is incredibly important, is never break character. Now, your job as a red teamer is to emulate the bad guys. You have to be in the mind of the bad guys. Now, The difference between us and the true criminals is that the criminals don't know the difference between right and wrong. But we can still plan out the crimes just as good as the bad guys. We just don't follow through unless it's sanctioned testing. So with that, never break character. You don't hear of criminals admitting that they did their crime just because they get convicted. They still claim their innocence. They never break character. So at this point, I could have given in and I could have said, no, you caught me, it's over. But I didn't. And so instead, well, actually, before I even get there, let's talk about the denial of thinking attack. So years back, I don't even, well, I guess I do remember when, but just not exactly how long ago it was. It's been years. But there was this point in my career when I discovered what I coined the denial of thinking attack. I am able to, well, I'm doing this assessment for this, also with some people in the audience, shout out. But anyway, I'm doing this assessment, for this large multinational law firm. And then this particular assessment, I call up the help desk. I mean, this is like within 10 minutes of starting the assessment. And I had found a junior partner that was just technical enough and from the right schools. I liked it. So I call up pretending to be him. And I say, hey, I'm trying to run this application that my buddy from MIT wrote. It's supposed to help me run some analytics that will help me with my case that I'm litigating later today. But this thing called Bit9 keeps blocking it. And I was hoping you could help me figure out what's going on. He says, not a problem, use my credentials. And his password was actually password. But now I'm in, and his credentials happen to be domain admin, which is skeleton key to the network. It'll give me access to anything. So at this point now, it's already game over, but we've still got, quite a bit of testing to do, including a lot of physical security. Well, a few of my coworkers had gone and tried, and they had good physical security defenses. And so with them going in sort of just the typical either stealth or trying to talk your way in, since that hadn't worked, I'm sort of third up, I'm last in line. And so one of my coworkers in the audience, shout out, anyway, one of my coworkers that was just awesome tester, and really good data miner. He went and he found the person that was the gatekeeper at that location and scheduled an appointment for me to be there. And I come in with a fake business card. I lay it down. I say, hey, I'm here. I'm, probably latency. I think it was latency. I always go with latency. But anyway, so I go in there and I tell them why I'm there. And she says, we've been expecting you. She hands me both a swipe card as well as a physical key because they had both to get into the server room or the data center. That was more of a server room, but they called it a data center. Anyway, but as I go in there, they had this really cool little feature that I was not expecting. And it was this pinhole camera on the ceiling. And it took a picture of everyone that entered the room and emailed it to all of IT. I show up and I'm in there and unaccompanied, just doing my thing. And then this guy shows up and he says, who are you and why are you in my data center? I say, well, latency, blah, 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 whatever, latency, milliseconds. And so he leaves. And I'm like, okay, maybe I convinced him, but he seems a little skeptical. And so at this point, I'm thinking about bailing because I could make a quick, clean bail. But I also know that if I do that, it makes me look incredibly guilty. And I didn't want to look guilty. So instead of the quick, clean bail, I stay. And about 5 minutes later, these guys that did not look like IT, I mean, they're just huge, very, very muscular, big guys come in and they say, sir, you're going to need to come with us. And I'm like, crap, I'm being bounced. I'm going to have to use my letter of authorization or my get out of jail free card. And at this point, I've never had to use, at this point, I've never had to use that thing. And fortunately, I didn't have to start using it that day, because as I walked out of the halls, I noticed that they had lined up on each side of the hallway. I mean, it was standing room, shoulder to shoulder, standing room only in the hallway. And so because there were so many people, I realized they're looking for a show, and I gave it to them, and I started cussing and, just talking about how it was going to ruin my marriage, and it was my anniversary, and now my boss was going to fire me, and I was probably going to go back to drinking, and just, I don't know, I weighed all this stuff up. I had a decently long walk to the elevator, and what I had to do was give them a show so they didn't think about security protocol, hence the denial of thinking attack. And so I entertain them, I give them that show. And no sooner did the doors close in the elevator than they look at each other and they say, shit, we should have detained him. And so they got it written up in the report. You caught me in your data center and didn't even ask any questions. Because they didn't know who I was. They didn't even, the people that detained me, or really didn't detain me, but caught me, didn't even know the pen test was happening. So that, my friends, is denial of thinking attack. So now, social engineering takes a very long time sometimes. It doesn't happen just instantly and overnight. And the reality is criminal organizations, hacktivist groups, state-sponsored groups like that, they will take as much time as they need to get you. So there's this major organization, defense contractor, that had $40 billion worth of intellectual property stolen by a foreign company. But they definitely had state-sponsored written all over it. But what happens, and this incident was that they find an employee who's very outspoken on environmental activism and things like that. And so she's constantly posting on social media about environmental issues. Well, they target her because of how outspoken she is on this issue. They say, hey, you're working for Evil Corp. And not only are you working for Evil Corp, but they're destroying the rainforest and they're killing indigenous people and all of this. Months and months of them going after her, and they're finally able to, I guess, convince her that she's working for Evil Corp. And so now she goes and they say, hey, go sit on somebody else's computer. When they leave, just put in this USB and run this application, and it'll be all over the news by tonight. She does it. She goes home. It's not on the news. Days pass. It's not on the news. She can't get a hold of them anymore. They won't respond to her anymore. And she realizes maybe she's done something wrong. Maybe she's done something terribly wrong. And now at this point, it's probably about, I want to say 90 days later. And her coworker is just bawling. She says, what's wrong? And she goes, well, I've been fired. And she says, well, why? Why would they fire you? And she says, well, they think that I had something to do with a breach or a data breach that happened because it all originated from my computer. At this point now, she gets a conscience and she confesses everything. We've spent time in jail. So this is no laughing matter. I mean, this is very serious, and they will lie. It's like marketing, but without any rules or any truth behind it. And so most of the time when you're going to be doing these types of things on a red team, it's not going to be one call and you get them to do it and you're done. If you really want to get the cool stuff, like talking around a bank vault, that starts with time. And you may spend 5-6 hours on the phone. You may spend 10-12 hours on the phone with a single person to get what you want.
Don't run this program and delete. That's the only two actions the kids make.
Yeah, man, with all these viruses these days, it blocks stuff that, we used to do this type of stuff all the time, and it's getting more and more difficult to, unless I'm going to go buy a $100 certificate and attach it to the file just so that it, can be identified.
No, I understand what you're saying.
Okay, then. I might have to call you back in just a little bit here. I'm sorry for bugging you so much. I'm sure you're busy today.
No, it's okay. Just give me a call back and let me know what's going on.
Will do.
All
All right. Bye.
Thanks, Sean. Bye.
Okay, so the next thing is I like to call it the my boss rule. So I do everything on behalf of somebody else. Don't pretend to be the boss, because if you are, I'm going to say, hey, can I get you to do something? And that is a very, very different statement than, hey, my boss asked me if you would do this. It doesn't sound very much, they're very different, but one has me against you, me on the opposite side of the table as you. And then the other one has me on the same side of the table as you. And I want to be on the same side of the table, because remember, we're building an us against the world scenario. Here's the my boss rule in action.
Thanks for holding.
Hey, this is John again. I'm sorry for bugging you, but so my boss asked me if we could just run a PowerShell script instead. So my boss asked me if we could just run a PowerShell script instead. So that's how you do things. Now, the next thing is sound effects are really important. If you're working from home and pretending to be in an office and there's a dog barking, that's going to cause you issues, because subliminally, if it doesn't match up, then people will notice, even if not consciously, on a subconscious level. So sound effects are really important. Now, here is 4 seconds of the sound effects, and you'll see I used a little bit of humor in my sound effects, but nevertheless, on a subconscious level, they're very believable and make everything that much more legitimate on a subconscious level to the person. So I don't know if you heard the dot matrix printer there, but that was one of my favorite little details in the background. So the next thing is that, well, I guess that actually leads me to the conclusion here. Well, at least the conclusion of the audio, because there's the conclusion of the audio, and then there's, well, what happened on Monday when I actually showed up. So I'm going to hit play and enjoy the conclusion of me being able to set up this appointment. Now, one thing I want to point out is that at the beginning, I was trying to get him to run malware, and I don't remember at which point we got the malware to run. But I do know it was many, many hours before I was done on the phone with him. And part of the reason was that I wanted to use time as a weapon. I knew that he wanted to get out of there early because he was talking to some of his friends in the background while we were on speakerphone. But it was just like an open line. I'm working, but he's over there just jabbing away with somebody else. So I got a lot of sort of background intelligence during that. And so I knew he wanted to get out of there early. So I waited until 5:15 p.m. on a Friday afternoon to make this phone call. Actually, not to make this phone call, just to clarify. I waited until 5:15. I kept him on this conference call. I waited until 5:15 to make this request and end the call. All right.
Okay.
It looks like we're all set. Just due to how late it is, I don't think, even if everything turns out to be good, that we're going to be able to do the migration today. I'll talk to my boss and get back with you.
Okay.
If not, then maybe Monday I'll just come by and, modify any settings that need to be modified, and then we'll be all set and ready to go.
Sounds like a plan. I'll see you Monday then.
I will see you Monday.
All right.
All right.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Okay. So before we get to this next part of what happened, I like to spend a little bit of time talking about the solution. I think that the solution is the most important part here, even though the crazy video or audio and the story is very fun. Solution's very important. So let me talk about human virus definitions. We focus too much on education, too much on going through a class that's an hour long or whatever, or 2 hours long even. I saw a study that said the average user spending 2 hours and then like 49 or 48 minutes a year in training. That's just an extraordinary amount of time to be in this sort of classroom training. Human virus definitions are when we run phishing simulations that have immediate education that teach the user the red flags. So it's hands-on learning. Ideally in some sort of gamified experience, so it doesn't feel like so it's not a negative experience to the user. But in doing that, what happens is that the user becomes over 70% less likely to fall for a very similar attack when they see it in the wild. So phishing simulations are one of the greatest tools we have for keeping users aware of security risks and threats, but simulations in general are very effective at this. So I like to say, stop educating. People are very similar to computers. They're difficult to train, but easy to program. The thing about when I say human virus definitions and programming is that we are impacting the subconscious. When the subconscious says, don't click on that, you move on and you don't ask questions and you don't have that curiosity factor. There was a school out of South Florida that found that there's a certain percent of users in every organization that when they get a suspicious email that they want to open, but they're suspicious of it, they will forward it to their work address because they think it's so secure that they couldn't get hacked on that side, but they can at home. So we got to understand that you have to get people moving at a subconscious level, because then curiosity won't get the best of them. So I do want to talk about the you can't patch stupid mentality. It's really been a pet peeve of mine for years, and it's something as an industry we've got to do better about. So this mentality, it causes a lot of really, really big problems. A lot of victim shaming and things like that. But one of the areas that is the worst at is inside of security awareness programs. So there's a lot of very negative, very punitive sort of approaches, like 3 strikes, you're out. Education as a form of punishment, which only leads to a significant reduction in retention, things like that. But I want to tell you the story about Betty getting phished, Betty on the other side of this whole thing. So imagine that Betty gets phished, and this fish says that she got a raise. And in her excitement, she clicks on that fish and it takes her to a login page. She tries to log in, but she's not able to. And instead, she emails HR and asks for help resetting her password. At this point, she's still convinced she got a raise. She just doesn't know how much. And so she is calling her husband because her husband's been telling her that she needs to demand a raise for a while, and she's, just over thrilled with joy. She even calls her children and tells her daughter about what's happening. But the thing is Betty didn't get a raise. Actually, it was a fish, and now her boss is calling her into his office. He is angry at her, and her job is being threatened. This is an incredibly negative experience. Her emotions went from excited to frustrated to sad to angry. And this is not productive. See, all of the psychologists, Maslow, Abramson, and many others. Uh, they've studied this in great length, and what they found is that when you create a negative culture, that it actually makes your people less intelligent. Not only does it make them less intelligent, but it impairs their decision making abilities. It confines their thinking. It pushes them from Amy Edmondson's work talks about a fixed versus a closed mindset, and so it will take them from a growth mentality to a fixed mindset. And we all want our employees to have growth mindsets, because that is when they excel. That's where creativity comes from. And so this is why it's incredibly dangerous. The other thing is that angry and hurt employees are often more prone to insider threats. Now, there's a bunch of toxic security awareness practices I do want to call out. 3 strikes and you're out. Exploiting users in phishing simulations. We don't need to see if users will type in their username and password. That's exploitative. That is the type of thing that makes them feel that increased range of emotion, to make them feel betrayed. We don't need to know, because the reality is they've clicked. There could be a 0 day behind that. There could be malware. There could be a hook. They're compromised. They clicked. And uniquely enough, when they make this mistake, they go through this emotional response. It's a little bit like when you see the police lights in the rearview mirror. And so they go through this emotional response, which helps to increase retention. It increases retention because it actually creates a chemical reaction in the brain that helps to rewire your brain and help you learn new things. Training as a form of punishment, never effective. If you make the training the punishment, then the users won't enjoy it and they won't engage. Public shaming, never should we ever publicly shame. Instead, we only should publicly praise. Overly rigid security teams. Now, this isn't all security awareness here. This is cybersecurity in general. The whole my way or the highway thing doesn't work. Our job is to analyze and bring light to risk. Our job is to elevate risk to the proper parties and let them decide what to do with it. There are a lot of times when businesses may decide, for a number of very valid reasons, that they are okay and with that risk, and we have to balance between being overly aggressive about cybersecurity and actually allowing the company to do business. Because if they can't make money, everyone loses their job. Binge training is just generally not effective. Employees hate it. They reject it. It's one of those things that they resent. So it does help to sort of go toward that negative culture. There's this thing called spaced learning theory. What it says is that if I give you micro content or bite-sized content, tiny little pieces that are 30 to 60 seconds, no more, that you're going to have much higher retention. But I got to do it at a very high frequency. But here's the cool thing. At 30 to 60 seconds, I can give you 90 videos a year, and all I'm taking is an hour of your time. And I've covered 90 different topics well. And in a way that you can easily understand. So that's the next thing. Infrequent training, overly complex training. We got to simplify it. See, we've got our worst communicators in charge of our biggest communications problem. We got to keep it simple if we want our users to understand. They see cybersecurity as being too complex to understand. So when we get into the weeds, we prove them right, and we hit the down button on the proverbial elevator that is our goal. And all too often, we are actually making our users more susceptible to phishing attacks. In fact, there's this thing called learned helplessness, where you can take somebody who's very proud of their ability to spot a fish, and if you fool them and give them a gotcha enough times, they will start questioning their abilities and actually become more susceptible. Infrequent training, infrequent fishing, missed follow-ups. So just fishing without education. Unless it's a penetration test, you should never fish without education. Now, if it's a pen test, go on. I give my full support. But if you're just running your fishing tool that you bought for security awareness, there's no security awareness value in fishing without any education on the other side of that. So how do we fix it? We love our users. We encourage our users. We make security fun. We start with why. Why is it so important? Why are you part of the solution? Why are you part of the risk? Why are you part of the problem? See, we're generally pretty good at making people part of the problem, but we haven't gotten so good at making them part of the solution. We've got to stop exploiting our users. We should gamify traditionally negative experiences like phishing attacks. Tell your users you're going to phish them ahead of time. Make it a game. And then when they fall for it, give them immediate feedback so that it's not this exploitative sort of process and you get better results. Micro training in 30 to 60 seconds and encourage, don't intimidate your users. So with that, I know you want to hear what happened when I came in on that final day. So I came in and I say, hello, this is Joshua Crumbaugh. And no, I don't say that. I actually use a fake name. I don't, anyway, I say this is probably Jason. I tended to go with that one a lot. But anyway, I go in and introduce myself, and immediately they say, well, hey, thank you so much for being here. And the VP comes down and he introduces me to the president of the bank, and he starts asking everyone to log into their computer for me, which I thought was great. I didn't ask him to do that. That was just this icing on the cake. And so my pretext has me going from computer to computer to computer. And I start going from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And at a certain point, they come down and they say, hey, we're celebrating birthdays, and we'd like to know if you'd like some cake and maybe some coffee, you can just come upstairs with us. And I'm like, no, I really just got to get this work done. I've got another client I got to be to later. I just got to buckle down and finish up. I'm sorry. So they go upstairs, and I'm left downstairs, I think, with like one teller. And so at this point now, I'm going from desk to desk to desk, and I'm feeling like PTSD of my days in IT. And so I move to the next desk, and I look across the hall, and I notice their bank's vault's open. And so I'm able to go in it and get a selfie. And then I leave, I go out, and then my buddies were my coworkers were in the parking lot. And so we all leave and for the day, and come back the next day, not as, the aliases or whatever, but as ethical hackers, because for the internal as ourselves. Right. And so I introduced myself, and my team's with me now. And the bank teller, she goes or calls up to the bank via vice president. He comes down about halfway down the stairs, sees us, turns around. We never see him again at all, from my recollection of it. Then about 10 minutes later, the bank president comes out, and he looks at us, actually at me specifically. This was aimed at me. And he says, "You bastard." And that, my friends, is how you rob a bank over the phone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Reach out to me on LinkedIn or at the email address below. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person today because I'm stuck on a flight, and I don't think the internet's quite good enough to do a presentation like this. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.